Ready to dive into some social Darwinism?
Yeah.
It's, I don't know, it can seem kind of like, a, a dusty old history book thing, but
Right.
it's, really relevant, I think, more than people realize.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do a deep dive into this whole concept of applying survival of the fittest to society.
Okay.
Um, and which sounds,
Yeah.
pretty simple on the surface, but
Yeah, definitely not.
it's way more complicated than that.
It's more than complicated. It's really a distortion
Yeah.
of what Darwin was talking about.
Right.
Darwin was talking about the evolution of species
Right.
over long periods of time, generations.
Right.
Social Darwinism basically hijacked that
Yeah.
and turned it into a way to justify social hierarchies and often oppression and terrible things.
Right.
It's like, if you try to use the laws of gravity
Okay.
to argue that you should keep people locked in a basement,
Okay. Yeah. That's a good analogy. That's a good one.
it just makes zero sense. And,
Right.
and it's deeply unethical.
Yeah. No, that's a disturbingly good analogy. I like that.
Okay.
So let's try to break down this Christed logic.
Okay.
So I guess where do we even begin?
Well, at its core,
Yeah.
social Darwinism hinges on this warped idea of survival of the fittest,
Right.
but applied to people
Right.
and societies.
Yeah.
So basically it's saying that only the strongest individuals
Mm-hmm.
really deserve to be successful, and anybody who doesn't make it
Yeah.
is just, nature taking its course.
Right. Right.
So no need for compassion
Yeah.
or second chances or anything.
Yeah. That's rough.
Yeah.
So then that kind of bleeds into this idea that
Yeah.
certain groups of people are inherently like better than others
Yeah.
based on like
Right.
like race or class or whatever arbitrary category.
Exactly, whatever they pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it gets really dangerous.
Right. Right.
Because then it's if some groups are inherently superior, it's
Yeah.
very convenient to use that to justify
Oh yeah.
exploiting those who are seen as inferior.
Right.
So it's a recipe for just terrible dehumanization
Right.
and suffering. So
We're talking about ideas here, but like these ideas had real world consequences. Right?
legally, yeah.
Like, I mean, this kind of thinking
Yeah.
led to some pretty horrible things, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at the eugenics movement of
Sure.
the early 20th century.
Yeah.
This wasn't just some fringe theory.
Right.
This was embraced
Yeah.
by governments, by intellectuals,
Yeah.
driven by this idea that we can improve the human race.
Right.
They actually used forced sterilization
Wow.
on individuals deemed unfit to reproduce.
Wow.
And it went even as far as genocide in some cases,
Oh,
all based on this idea of inherent superiority
wow.
and inferiority.
That's terrifying that happened in modern times.
Yeah.
So eugenics is one very concrete consequence of this.
Totally.
What are some other examples of
Sure.
social Darwinism in action throughout history?
Colonialism is a big one, obviously.
Right.
European powers use this whole survival of the fittest logic
Mm-hmm.
to justify conquering and exploiting entire populations around the world. They genuinely thought that they were bringing civilization.
Yeah, right. The white man's burden thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
To the inferior races, which
Well,
is just,
It's just wild.
a terrible justification
Yeah.
for their actions.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing
That
how,
is.
how this kind of thinking was used to cause so much pain
Yeah,
and suffering.
totally.
I mean, I guess social Darwinism is pretty widely discredited today,
Mhm.
but it's hard to imagine these ideas just vanishing completely.
You're right to be skeptical.
Yeah.
While overt, social Darwinism may not be as prevalent, some of these core ideas still linger,
Yeah.
often disguised as common sense
Right.
or individual responsibility.
Yeah.
It takes a careful eye to spot them.
Okay, so if we're going to be able to spot these dangers,
Yeah.
I guess we need to understand like why social Darwinism
Sure.
is so flawed.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay, well, for starters,
Yeah.
it completely ignores the fact that human beings are so complex.
Right.
I mean, modern genetics, anthropology, they've completely debunked this idea of these fixed inherent hierarchies,
Right.
you know?
Right. It's like saying all oak trees are superior to all pine trees.
Exactly.
Just because they're different.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just bad science.
It's just bad science.
Yeah.
And beyond the flawed science, it's crucial to recognize like how dehumanizing social Darwinism is at its core.
Right.
It strips away all the things that make us human. Compassion, empathy, cooperation. Right. It reduces us to just competitors in this ruthless game of survival.
It's funny because like our capacity for compassion and cooperation probably plays a bigger part in our
I think so.
survival as a species.
Absolutely.
Than any sort of idea of like individual strength.
It overlooks that humans have thrived because of our ability to work together, not just compete against each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
Thanks.
So this ideology is a mess on multiple levels, scientifically, morally, and even pragmatically.
Yeah.
So the question remains, are we really past this way of thinking?
That's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, and the answer is more complicated than just a yes or no.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, we don't see overt, in-your-face social Darwinism like we did back in the day.
Right.
But some of the fundamental ideas do resurface in subtle ways.
Yeah, so let's get into that. Like, how is this showing up today?
Well, think about like the arguments we hear against social safety nets. The ones that say, you know, if you're struggling, it's solely your fault.
Right.
You just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
That whole bootstraps mentality can echo those social Darwinist ideas.
Right.
It ignores the very real systemic barriers that hold people back, that have nothing to do with individual effort.
Right. So it's like assuming everyone's starting the race on a level playing field when they're not.
It's not level playing field.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole myth of meritocracy.
Right.
The idea that success is solely based on merit and hard work.
Right.
Sounds good in theory, but it ignores the impact of privilege and systemic inequalities. And that's where those social Darwinist ideas can creep in.
Yeah, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
It can sound, fair and harmless on the surface, but underneath it's still perpetuating those same damaging ideas about, inherent superiority and the deserving versus the undeserving.
Yeah. That's it.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And what's even more concerning is how these ideas, can be used to justify inaction.
Absolutely.
Or even harmful policies.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, there was a recent news story that comes to mind that I think kind of illustrates this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That situation really highlights how, these seemingly outdated ideas can resurface in a new context.
Yeah.
And often with pretty devastating consequences.
Okay, so before we dive into that specific example, let's take a quick step back.
Yeah.
And just remind ourselves, like, why does this matter?
Sure.
Why are these ideas dangerous?
Right.
What's the big deal?
Yeah.
If some people still cling to these outdated notions of survival of the fittest.
Because those outdated notions have a way of shaping our perceptions, our policies, and ultimately our behavior.
Yeah.
They lead to apathy, discrimination, and a lack of compassion for those who need it most.
Yeah, it's like if we just accept
the
premise that some people are just like inherently less deserving.
Yeah, exactly.
Or capable.
Less than.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it becomes easier to just turn a blind eye to their suffering.
Right.
Or to justify policies that marginalize vulnerable populations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So it's not just about abstract ideas.
Right.
It's about real people's lives.
Real people.
Yeah. And what kind of society we live in.
Yeah, and that's what makes this conversation
right.
so important. We need to equip ourselves with the knowledge and the tools to dismantle these harmful ideologies and create a more just and equitable world.
Well said.
Thanks.
So we've laid the groundwork.
Yeah.
Explored the, historical roots of social Darwinism.
Okay.
Now, Let's get into that
Yeah.
recent news story you mentioned.
Okay.
The one that,
Right.
illustrates how these dangerous ideas are still alive and kicking
Let's do it.
in the 21st century.
All right, I'm ready when you are.
Okay.
Great. All right, so this news story
Yeah.
centers around the recent debate
Right.
over access to health care.
Yeah.
And now, without taking sides or anything,
Of course.
I just want to lay out how some of the arguments against expanding coverage kind of echo those social Darwinist ideas. Some commentators have been pushing this narrative that healthcare is a privilege,
Okay.
not a right, and that only those who can afford it deserve it.
Yeah.
And they frame it as individual responsibility.
Okay.
Like if you can't pay, you're just not fit enough.
Wow.
To survive in this system.
Okay, I see what you're saying. It's like, they're applying that survival of the fittest logic to healthcare access.
Right.
It's crazy.
Those who can afford to stay healthy thrive.
Right.
And those who can't, well, tough luck.
It's really disturbing when you think about it.
Yeah.
Like all the pre-existing conditions and systemic inequalities that make it impossible for some people to even get to a point where they could afford quality health care.
Totally.
It just completely disregards the social and economic realities that shape people's lives.
Absolutely.
It's like saying, hey, if you can't climb this mountain with a broken leg, you're just not strong enough.
Exactly.
It ignores the fact that like the person's leg was broken in the first place.
All right.
Because of circumstances beyond their control.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how these seemingly outdated ideas can creep back into our thinking and shape public policy and be used to justify policies that actively harm the most vulnerable members of society.
It's chilling.
It is.
To think about how subtly these ideas can infiltrate our thinking.
Totally.
It makes me wonder if we're going to try to like dismantle these harmful ideologies, what are some concrete steps
good question.
we can take? It seems like such a massive, complex issue.
It's complex, but it doesn't mean we're powerless.
Okay.
I think knowledge is the first line of defense.
Okay.
We need to understand the history of these ideas, how they've been used to justify oppression, and why they're so fundamentally flawed.
Right. So we need to educate ourselves and others. But it can't just be like, dry facts and figures.
Yeah.
Right. We need to make this stuff engaging and relevant so it sticks with people.
I think one powerful way to do that is through storytelling.
Okay.
Personal stories have a way of humanizing complex issues and creating empathy. When we share our own experiences or hear the stories of those who've been directly impacted by these harmful ideologies, it just brings the issue to life in a way that statistics never could.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you can tell me a million times that poverty is a systemic issue. But like hearing a single story from someone who has lived that experience is going to have a much greater impact on me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about sharing our own stories.
Right.
It's equally important to listen to the stories of others.
Okay.
Especially those who have been marginalized or oppressed.
Right.
We need to create spaces where everyone feels safe and respected to share their experiences, their struggles, and their triumphs.
I love that.
Yeah.
Creating those spaces for open and honest dialogue. It's so crucial.
It is.
It allows us to challenge our own assumptions.
Totally.
And to see the world through different lenses.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
We're not going to dismantle these systems overnight.
Right. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's going to take consistent effort, a willingness to learn and grow, and a commitment to challenging injustice whenever we see it.
Yeah. And there will be setbacks along the way.
Oh, for sure.
But we can't let that discourage us.
Absolutely not.
It's about persistence.
Yeah.
And a belief that we can create a better world.
I actually am quite optimistic.
Okay.
I think we're living in a time of increased awareness and activism.
I see that too.
Yeah.
There's a growing movement of people who are committed to creating a more just and equitable world.
And while it can feel overwhelming at times, it's important to remember that every action no matter how small,
Right.
contributes to this collective movement for justice.
Yeah, it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Totally.
You know, we can't just wait for someone else to fix these problems.
Exactly.
We got to be active participants in creating
That's how we create change.
the world we want to live in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for our listeners who are feeling fired up, ready to take action, what are some tangible steps they can take in their own lives to challenge these deeply ingrained ideas?
Well, a great place to start is with self-reflection. I mean, we all have biases, conscious or unconscious, and they influence our thoughts, words, and actions. The first step is to just acknowledge those biases and to actively work on dismantling them.
It's like looking in the mirror and getting really honest with ourselves about what we see, good and bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And once we're aware of our own biases, we can start to challenge them. We can educate ourselves about different perspectives, engage in respectful dialogue with people who hold different views, and just be open to changing our own minds.
Yeah, it's about cultivating that spirit of humility and curiosity.
Absolutely.
Recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
Totally.
And that there's always more to learn.
And being willing to get uncomfortable, challenging our biases, confronting injustice can be difficult, but it's necessary.
It's like that saying, growth happens outside of your comfort zone.
That's right.
Yeah, we can't expect to create real change.
You've got it.
If we're not willing to challenge ourselves and the systems around us.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we're not alone in this.
Okay, yeah.
There are countless individuals and organizations already working to create a more just and equitable world. Connect with them, learn from them, support their efforts.
So it's about finding those communities of like-minded individuals who are also committed to creating a more just world.
Absolutely.
Where can our listeners
That's a good question.
find those resources and support?
I mean, there's a wealth of information online in our communities. A simple Google search can turn up tons of social justice organizations, anti-racism resources, groups dedicated to specific causes. And don't underestimate the power of local community groups and initiatives.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the power of grassroots organizing. Sometimes the most meaningful change starts at the local level.
Starts at home.
Yeah, so it's about getting involved in our own community.
Absolutely. And it's not just about financial contributions. It's about showing up, being present, using our voices to advocate for change, volunteering your time, attending rallies, contacting your elected officials, even just having conversations with your friends and family about these issues.
Like all these actions contribute to a larger movement.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how much power we actually do have as individuals.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah. And collectively, you know, we can create a wave of change.
Love that image.
That's powerful enough to dismantle.
It really captures the idea that our individual actions combined with the actions of others create a force that's much greater than the sum of its parts.
So for our listeners who are inspired to take action, like right now, what's one tangible step?
Good question.
They can take today?
I think a simple but powerful step is to have a conversation with someone about these issues. It could be a friend, family member, colleague, even a stranger. Share what you've learned about social Darwinism and its lasting legacy, and just invite them to reflect on how these ideas might be impacting their own lives.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's about sparking those critical conversations and encouraging others to think more deeply about these issues.
You never know. You might just plant a seed that inspires someone to take action. And that's how we create real change. One conversation, one action, one ripple at a time.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I've really enjoyed it.
It's clear that these ideas, while scientifically debunked, still have a profound impact on our world.
They do.
But, you know, by understanding their history, recognizing their modern manifestations, and actively challenging their harmful premises, we can work towards creating a more just, equitable, and compassionate society.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's a journey, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
And it's one we don't have to take alone.
Right. We have each other. And we have the power to create a better world.
That's right.
So for our listeners, as you go about your day, I want you to keep this question in mind.
All right.
What actions can you take, no matter how small, to challenge the legacy of social Darwinism and promote a more just and equitable world?
It's a question worth pondering. And even more importantly, it's a question worth acting on.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been great.
On this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
It's amazing how much power language has.
Oh, it really does.
You know, the words we use can either reinforce these harmful stereotypes or help us dismantle them.
Totally.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, I think we often underestimate the impact of our words, even when we have, good intentions.
Right.
Take, for example, terms like inner city or ghetto.
Okay.
They're often loaded with negative connotations, perpetuating stereotypes about poverty and crime.
Right.
So we can choose to use, more neutral language like urban or neighborhood.
Right. Yeah.
And that can help shift the narrative a bit.
It's like we're subconsciously reinforcing those social Darwinist ideas by using language that implies certain communities are just inherently less than.
Less than, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about avoiding, offensive language. It's also about actively using language that promotes inclusion and respect.
Right.
So, for example, making an effort to use gender-neutral pronouns or using people's preferred names and pronouns can make a huge difference in creating a more welcoming and inclusive environment.
Those small changes can have a ripple effect.
They really can.
And it can make people feel seen and valued.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of expanding our perspectives, another important step is to educate ourselves about different cultures and experiences.
Right.
The more we understand about other people's lives and the challenges they face, the less likely we are to fall prey to those harmful stereotypes and prejudices.
It's about broadening our horizons.
Totally.
Challenging our own assumptions. Stepping outside our bubble.
Absolutely.
And engaging with the world in all its complexity.
It doesn't have to be daunting.
Yeah.
It can be as simple as striking up a conversation with someone from a different background, attending a cultural event, reading a book by an author whose perspective is different from your own.
Sometimes we get so caught up in our own lives.
It's easy to do.
That we forget. There's a whole world out there
totally.
Filled with diverse perspectives and experiences.
And it's so enriching to step outside ourselves and learn from others.
And another powerful way to make a difference is, by supporting organizations that are working to address social injustice.
Right. Absolutely.
Whether it's, donating to a charity, volunteering our time, spreading awareness about their work.
Exactly.
And, we can amplify the efforts of those who are on the front lines fighting for a more just an equitable world.
It's about putting our values into action.
Yeah, I love that.
Not just talking about it.
Right. It's
but doing something.
I'm not just going to talk about this.
Right.
I'm going to do something about it.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that even small actions make a difference.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of these issues.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, what can I possibly do?
Totally. But every action matters.
But you're right. Every action, no matter how small, adds to this collective movement.
It does. Yeah. It's a ripple effect.
Right.
Together, we can create a wave of change that's powerful enough to dismantle these systems.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into social Darwinism, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Social Darwinism, at its core, is the belief system that seeks to divide us. Pit us against each other in this ruthless competition for survival. But the truth is, we're not meant to exist in isolation. We're social creatures wired for connection, cooperation, empathy. Our greatest strength lies not in our individual abilities, but in our collective capacity for love, compassion, and shared responsibility.
That's such a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
We're not meant to go through this life alone.
I agree.
We're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And the well-being of each of us depends on the well-being of all of us.
Exactly. So let's choose to build a world
Yeah.
where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. A world that values cooperation over competition.
Right.
Empathy over apathy.
Yeah.
Justice over injustice.
It won't be easy.
It won't.
But it's a fight worth fighting.
It is.
And together, we can make a difference.
Absolutely, we can.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
It's been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah, me too.
We hope you'll continue to explore these ideas and find ways to challenge the legacy of social Darwinism in your own life and in the world around you.
Absolutely.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning and keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.